The sun stood mercilessly high over Split Ridge, spilling light like molten brass onto the warped wooden boards of the town square. Heat shimmered in the distance, turning the horizon into a wavering mirage. Dust clung to everything, the buildings, the horses, the boots of the gathered crowd, and it clung to her. Marabel Grafton stood at the center of it all, bound to a rough-hewn post with a rope so tight it dug into the skin of her wrists. Her once white wedding dress, the one she had sewn herself from scraps and saved lace, was now torn and streaked with dirt. The bodice sagged where the seams had given way, and the hem was frayed from being dragged across the ground. A hatpin held a thin veil over her hair, but it drooped in the heat, a limp and useless shield. Mayor Silas Trumbull stood beside her, a gavel in one hand and a smug smile on his weathered face. His voice carried easily over the murmurs of the crowd. $2, he called, and you can take your turn, pay your dues to the town, and help settle the Grafton debts. He might as well have said, pay to spit on her, because that's what they were here for. Not justice, not fairness, but the sport of humiliation. The crowd chuckled and shifted, the coins in their pockets rattling like small promises of cruelty. In a shallow wooden box at Silas's feet lay the morning's earnings, a scattering of silver dollars, nickels, and crumpled bills. The box was already half full. Every man who stepped forward earned the right to step closer, hawk up phlegm, and spit on the woman whose only crime was being her father's daughter. Marabel kept her hand still at her waist because stillness was the only dignity she had left to control. She kept her head forward, her eyes fixed on the far horizon beyond the saloon roofline. She thought of quiet things, a needle biting through cloth, the click of her mother's ribbon tin, the smell of fresh bread cooling on a windowsill. Anything but this. The first man up was Cole Danner, a cattle drover with a crooked grin and spit already glistening on his lip. He slapped $2 silver into the box with the finality of a man buying a drink. Then he leaned close, his breath sharp with whiskey, and spat. The rope held her still as the warm trail struck her cheek and slid down to the frayed neckline of her dress. She did not flinch. She did not blink. Around her, the planks of the platform drank the wet, each darkened stain a tally of her public shaming. Somewhere toward the back, she thought she saw Hester Vaughn, the seamstress, lingering with a rag hidden in her apron, her face pale and tight with fury. Silas's gavel tapped once. Who's next? The men shuffled forward, eager for their turn, some laughing, others quiet in their cruelty. The coins rang as they hit the box, a sound Marabel would never forget, the sound of her worth measured in silver. Above the line of broad-brimmed hats, she caught a glimpse of movement at the far edge of the square. A man stood beside a roan mare, taller than anyone around him, his leather vest unbuttoned to the heat. His skin was bronzed, his hair braided down his back. He wasn't watching Silas. He was watching her. For a moment she forgot the heat, the rope, the spit drying on her skin. His eyes didn't dart or leer. They simply stayed, steady as the ground beneath her bare feet. And something deep inside her, something she thought had been trampled out long ago, stirred. The stranger didn't move at first. He stood at the edge of the square like a man weighing a river's current before stepping in. His hands rested easily on the reins of his roan mare, but his eyes never left Marabel. Silas Trumbull followed the direction of her gaze and spotted him. The mayor puffed himself up, squaring his shoulders like a man ready to swat a fly. "You got $2 like decent folk?" he called out, his voice sharp enough to cut the murmurs in half. The stranger didn't answer right away. He took one step forward, then another. The boards creaked under the weight of his boots, each step slow enough to draw every eye in the square. Cole Danner, still wiping his mouth on the back of his hand, stepped sideways to block the stranger's path. "Line starts back there, big man," he sneered. The Apache didn't look at him. His eyes slid past, up to the platform where Marabel stood. He saw the spit drying on her cheek. He saw the safety pin holding together a tear in her bodice, a small badge of quiet resilience. In one fluid motion, he unbuttoned his shirt from the vest seam and drew it off. The fabric was sun-warmed and smelled faintly of cedar smoke. He stepped onto the platform. Marabel's breath caught, uncertain whether to brace for another humiliation or something else. He stood before her without touching her, then lifted the shirt as if it were part of a ceremony. The cloth brushed her cheek once, twice, wiping away the streak. Then, with the same care, He touched the edge of the neckline where cruelty had pulled the fabric, lifting away that stain too. When he stepped back, the shirt bore a small, bright patch of clean, a flag of defiance against the grime. "That's enough," Cold Anner snapped, moving to grab her arm. The stranger's hand shot out, catching Anner's wrist, not a hard grip, but certain. The kind of certainty that makes a man remember every bad choice he's ever made. Silas raised the gavel, irritation tightening his jaw. "This ain't your show, Apache." The stranger draped the soiled shirt gently across Marabel's shoulders. "Then make a decent one," he said, his voice low but caring. Marabel found her voice brittle but steady. "May I step down?" Silas tapped the gavel against the box. "Not until the tallies meet." The stranger's gaze flicked to the coins. "How much to end it?" "More than you brought," Silas said, baring his teeth in something that wasn't quite a smile. The Apache released Cold Anner's wrist and let his hand fall open. He looked at Marabel as if asking her permission to remain. She didn't nod, but she didn't look away either. Her silence was answer enough. "How much?" he asked again. Silas hesitated, sensing the crowd leaning in. $36, back taxes and unpaid obligations. The word obligations rolled through the crowd like a snake through dry grass. Everyone knew it meant bribes unpaid, favors refused. Marabel's voice cut through. "My father owed no man here. You made up this debt to settle a grudge." Murmurs rose, some in agreement, some in mockery, but the seed was planted. The stranger let the words settle before he reached into the pouch at his belt. Silver coins spilled into his palm, catching the sun in sharp flashes. 24, he counted. "I'll bring the rest by sundown." A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. Cold Anner barked a laugh. "Why bother? She ain't yours." "She's not yours either," the Apache replied. The words landed heavy, like a stone thrown into a still pond. Silas's smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat. The stranger stepped down from the platform, coins still in his hand, and took his place at the foot of the steps. He didn't leave. He didn't need to. His presence alone became a wall no one wanted to test first. The line stalled, the heat thickened, and for the first time that day, Marabel felt the smallest crack in the wall that had been closing around her all morning. The sun edged lower, but the heat still pressed down like a heavy palm. The square had grown quieter, the hum of conversation thinning to occasional coughs and shuffles of boots. Takakota still stood at the base of the platform, the coins gleaming in his palm, a silent barrier between Marabel and the men who had been so eager minutes before. Silas Trumbull didn't like silence. Silence meant people were thinking, and thinking often led to doubt. He rapped the gavel sharply against the wooden box, trying to rattle the stillness back into noise. "You all heard me," he called. "Debt's $36. Until it's paid, she stays up there." A voice from the back, a woman's voice, carried across the square. "Debt you made up yourself, Silas." Hester Vaughn was pushing her way through the crowd, her apron still dusted with thread clippings and chalk. Her eyes were sharp, her jaw set. She came to stand near the platform, close enough for Marabel to see the fine sheen of sweat on her brow. "You've made your point," Hester said flatly. "Let her down, before you shame the whole county." "County don't care," Silas muttered, but he shifted his stance. Takakota moved then, crossing to Hester and placing the coins into her open hands. "Hold these. I'll bring the rest by sundown." His voice wasn't a request. Hester's fingers closed around the silver instinctively. She tucked it deep into her apron pocket as if she were protecting something alive. Cold Anner stepped forward again, his swagger returning now that the Apache's back was half turned. "Move along, big man. You made your show, now let the rest of us finish." Takakota pivoted, his shadow falling over Anner. His voice was quiet, but the edge in it was sharp enough to cut. "You paid $2, he said. "You had your spit. Leave." Anner's smirk faltered. He glanced toward Silas, but the mayor only lifted a hand in dismissal. Calculations were running behind Silas's eyes now. The cost of pushing this man, the risk of losing face entirely. Marabel, beneath the limp veil, felt the rope bite at her wrists as she shifted. For the first time since being dragged onto the platform, she could almost breathe. She couldn't see the whole of what Takakota was doing, but she knew the feel of a wall when she stood behind one. Finally, Silas gave a sour wave toward one of his deputies. "Bring her down," he muttered. The deputy obeyed with a jerk of the knot that nearly pulled Marabel forward. She steadied herself, refusing to stumble in front of the few who still lingered to watch. When her feet touched the dirt, the heat from the ground rose through her thin shoes, grounding her in a way the platform never could. Hester stepped to her side, looping an arm through hers. "We'll get you cleaned up," she murmured. Marabel let herself be led away, but her eyes searched for the tall figure who had stood between her and the crowd. She found him near the hitching post, saddling his roan mare with slow, deliberate movements. "You didn't have to do that," she said, when she drew close enough. Takakota tightened the girth strap before answering. "No one did." The words settled between them, heavy with truth. She studied him, the braid down his back, the broad shoulders, the steady calm. "You're Apache," she said, not as a question. "I came to trade," he replied, "not to watch a woman shamed for sport." "They'll call you a troublemaker," she warned. "They've called me worse." She hesitated, then asked, "Why spend your silver on me?" He paused, smoothing the mare's mane, his gaze far away. "Once," he said quietly, "my sister stood where you stood. Different town, different price. No one stepped forward." Her throat tightened. "And your sister? She died that winter." His voice didn't crack, but the space between words was filled with something raw. The heat, the dust, the weight of the day, all of it seemed to fold around that single truth. By late afternoon, the light had taken on a copper hue, the kind that made shadows stretch long across the boardwalks. Hester Vaughn's sewing shop smelled faintly of soap and camphor, a clean contrast to the dust-heavy air outside. Marabel sat by the window with a glass of tepid water in her hands, the rope burns on her wrists still raw. Hester was at the basin, rinsing the shirt Takakota had draped over Marabel's shoulders. The stains clung stubbornly to the fabric, dark smudges that resisted her work. "Won't come clean easy," she muttered, twisting the cloth between her fingers. "But it's worth saving. Man gave it to you like it meant something." Marabel didn't answer. Her thoughts were still on the hitching post, on the quiet way Takakota had fastened the saddle straps, on the way he'd said no one did. The bell over the shop door jangled, and Mayor Silas Trumbull stepped inside like a man entering a place he already owned. His boots clapped against the floorboards, and his gaze landed on Marabel with the weight of possession. "You ought to be thanking me," he said. "Gave the town a chance to balance your father's debts." Hester straightened, cloth still in her hands. "You call that balance?" she asked sharply. Silas ignored her. He took 2 slow steps toward Marabel's chair, his shadow sliding over her lap. "That Apache's interference won't help you. Men like him come through, stir up trouble, and vanish. By sundown tomorrow, you'll still owe me $12. Marabel met his gaze, her voice steady despite the cold crawling up her spine. "You made up the debt, Silas. Everyone knows it." His smile was thin, the kind that only looked like a smile if you didn't know the man. "Doesn't matter what they know, only what they'll do, and they won't cross me." He leaned closer, the scent of stale tobacco and sweat clinging to him. "Tell your giant friend to keep his distance, or the sheriff might start asking about stolen pelts." Hester stepped between them, planting herself like a wall. "You've said your piece, now get out." Silas's eyes flicked to her, then back to Marabel. "You've got until noon tomorrow to pay, or I'll find a way to collect worth more than coin." The door shut behind him, leaving the smell of dust in his wake. Marabel's hands tightened around the glass until Hester pried it from her fingers. "You can't meet that kind of man head on," Hester warned. "He's got too many hands and too many pockets." Marabel rose, crossing to the table where the damp shirt lay. Her fingers traced the weave of the fabric, lingering on the patch that had brushed her cheek. "He'll come back," she said quietly, almost to herself. Hester glanced up. "You think so?" "I know so." She didn't know why she believed it, only that she did. Maybe it was the steadiness in Takakota's eyes, or the way he'd put himself between her and the crowd without asking for anything. Outside, the sun dipped lower, the air cooling just enough for the sound of distant hoofbeats to carry. Hester went to the window, parting the lace curtain. "Well," Either you're a prophet or a fool, she murmured. Marabel joined her, and there he was, riding back into town, the roan's hooves raising lazy curls of dust in the evening light. Takakota dismounted with unhurried grace, a leather pouch in his hand that clinked with the weight of coins. He crossed the street with his eyes fixed on the shop. The bell chimed as he stepped inside, the light behind him framing him like the edge of a storm. He set the pouch on the table and tipped it open so the neat stacks of silver caught the glow. "The debt's paid," he said simply. "Silas has no more claim." For a long moment no one spoke. The coins sat in the center of Hester Vaughn's table, small towers of dull light that seemed heavier than their weight. Marabel's eyes moved from the silver to Takakota's face, searching for the catch, the unspoken bargain. But his expression didn't shift. It was calm, steady, as if he were telling her this was nothing more than the settling of a balance. "Why?" she asked again, softer this time. His answer was just as simple. "Because you should walk this town without bowing your head." The words lingered in the air, heavier than the coins themselves. Hester crossed her arms, her mouth pressed into a hard line. "Silas won't take this kindly. You've robbed him of his show. He'll find another way to make her pay." Takakota nodded once. "Then I'll be here when he does." He didn't say it as a boast, but as a plain, unshakable truth. The certainty in his voice sent a strange warmth through Marabel's chest, not the kind of warmth born of comfort, but the rare kind that comes when someone stands without flinching on your side. She reached out and touched the edge of the pouch, the silver cool beneath her fingertips. "You said your sister—" He glanced toward the window, where the evening shadows had begun to pool in the street. "Her name was Nasha. She was younger than you. When my father died, I went north to work cattle. She stayed in our mother's lodge." His voice slowed, each word stripped down to its truth. "That winter, soldiers came, took her to a fort town, paraded her in the square, $2 a man to spit, to throw scraps, same as here." His jaw tightened, the muscles in his cheek hardening like stone. "I wasn't there to stop it." Marabel could see it, not the square itself, but the edges of it in his voice, the way his eyes looked far past the present, the way his hands stilled completely on the table. She imagined a girl younger than herself, standing alone in the dust, the laughter of strangers cutting through the cold. "And after?" she asked, her voice barely more than breath. "She didn't last the winter," Takakota said. "They called it sickness, but it wasn't just sickness." The room seemed to shrink around them. Hester shifted uncomfortably, as though the weight of his words had settled in her bones too. "You can't change what happened to her," she said, "but you did something today that's worth more than silver." Takakota inclined his head slightly, though doubt flickered in his eyes, like a shadow crossing the sun. "Silas will come tonight or tomorrow," he said. "If you're alone, he'll press you. Where do you sleep?" "In my father's house at the end of Willow Street," Marabel answered. "It's just me now." Hester's gaze sharpened. "Then you're staying here tonight? No sense inviting trouble?" Marabel hesitated. She hated the thought of being a burden, but the memory of Silas leaning over her chair was still fresh, his breath heavy with threat. Takakota pushed back from the table. "I'll stay near," he said. "If you see me, don't speak. It's easier that way." Marabel nodded, though something about the thought of him out there, alone in the dark, made her uneasy. The bell above the door jingled softly as he stepped outside, the sound swallowed by the cooling air. From the window she watched him mount the roan mare and ride toward the edge of town, his silhouette folding into the band of shadow where the boardwalk met the open prairie. Hester locked the door and drew the curtains tight. "He's putting himself in Silas's sights," she said. "That man doesn't back down." Marabel traced the frame of the window with her fingertips. "Neither does he," she murmured. Outside, the last of the light faded, but the image of Takakota standing between her and the crowd stayed bright in her mind. Like the shirt on her shoulders, like the silver on the table, like the promise that maybe, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. Night settled over Split Ridge like a lid closing on a jar. The day's heat still clung to the boards of Hester Vaughn's sewing shop, radiating in slow waves that made the air heavy and close. The curtains were drawn, the lamps trimmed low, the only sound the slow, steady tick of the wall clock. Marabel sat at the small kitchen table with her back to the curtained window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Hester moved quietly around the room, setting out bread and a small crock of butter, but her eyes kept flicking toward the front door. "He'll try something," she murmured. "Silas never leaves well enough alone." The boards outside creaked with the sound of boots, not the quick, careless step of a man passing by, but the heavy, deliberate pace of someone arriving with purpose. 2 sets. The sound stopped just beyond the door. A slow, deliberate knock followed. "Evening, Miss Vaughn," came Silas Trumble's voice, drawn out and oiled. "I've come for a word with our benefactor's little friend." Hester straightened, her hand closing around the latch but not opening it. "She's sleeping." "Wake her," Silas said, his tone carrying the weight of a man used to being obeyed. "No." The pause that followed was thick enough to feel. "You'd best remember," Silas said finally, "debts in this town don't vanish because some outsider waves silver around." Another voice, lower and rougher, cut in. Cole Danner. "Maybe she needs reminding." A boot slammed into the bottom of the door, rattling the frame. Marabel flinched, her chair scraping against the floor. Before the next blow could land, a shadow moved past the side window, tall enough to block the lamplight from the street. A deep, calm voice spoke from outside. "You've had your say, Trumbull. Leave." The silence that followed was the kind where even the air seemed to hold still. Both men knew exactly who it was. "Not your fight, Apache," Silas replied. "Everything in this town's my fight if I choose it," Takakota answered. There was the soft creak of leather as he dismounted. His boots hit the boards outside. "Step away from the door." Cole laughed, short and ugly. "Or what?" The next sound was sharp and fast, a thud, a grunt, and Cole's voice cut off in a strangled wheeze. "You're choking me." "Not yet," Takakota said evenly, "but you'll wish I had if you don't walk away." Inside, Hester shot Marabel a glance that said, "Stay put." Outside, Silas tried to sound amused. "You think you can scare me?" "No," Takakota said. "I think I can end this before your men see you crawl." A beat passed. Boots scraped backward on the boards. "This isn't over," Silas spat. "It is for tonight," Takakota replied. The sound of their retreat faded into the stillness. Takakota's shadow shifted closer to the window, just at the edge of the curtain's glow. "They won't stop," Marabel said quietly, knowing he could hear her. "Then I won't either," he answered. And then he was gone, his shadow melting back into the street. Hester slid the bolt into place and exhaled hard. "That man's making enemies faster than he's making friends," she muttered, though there was grudging respect in her tone. Marabel returned to her chair, her heart still beating too fast. Somewhere out there, under the dark spread of prairie sky, Takakota was watching the street, the rooftops, maybe even the space between her breaths. She wasn't sure if that thought should comfort her or frighten her, but it settled into her bones just the same. Morning broke with a dusty gold light spilling through Hester Vaughn's narrow windows. The town smelled faintly of last night's whiskey and sun-baked wood. Marabel woke on the shop's sewing room cot, the sounds of Hester's broom sweeping the boardwalk outside, drifting in through the walls. She sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in her shoulders from a night spent half alert, listening for boots on the porch. "I didn't hear him come by," she murmured when Hester returned, broom bristles tapping the floor. "That's because he didn't," Hester replied without looking up from the counter. "I peeked out before dawn. No horse, no sign. Maybe he's smart enough to keep his head down until Silas cools." Marabel doubted it. The doubt proved right when the bell above the door chimed softly. Takakota stepped inside, filling the frame like a man carved into it. He carried a small burlap sack and set it on Hester's counter. "Half for cloth," he said, nodding to the mended shirts folded neatly nearby. "Half for her." Marabel blinked. "For me?" "To keep you standing until they leave you be," he said. She shook her head. "I can't take more of your silver." "It's not charity," Takakota replied. "It's investment. When you walk through that square again, it will be with your head high. I mean to see it." Hester gave a short, skeptical laugh, her hands busy with the shirts. "You'll have to do more than buy dignity in this town, Apache. Silas runs on spite, and spite doesn't spend easy. Takakota reached into his vest pocket and drew out a worn silver dollar. Its edges were smoothed from years of passing through hands. "This was my father's," he said, placing it in Marabel's palm. "He kept it as a promise that he'd always return. When he didn't, it became mine. I give it to you now. When this is over, you'll give it back." Marabel turned the coin over in her hand, feeling the weight of it. "And if it's never over, then you keep it," he said simply. Their eyes held for a long moment before Hester's voice broke in, low and tense. "Silas, and he's not alone." Takakota's shoulders shifted slightly, the air around him sharpening. "How many?" "4, Hester said, peering out the slit between the curtain and the frame. "Cole's with them." Takakota looked at Marabel. "Stay inside. If they come in, go out the back." "And you?" she asked. "I'll speak with them." Before she could argue, he stepped into the bright morning, the door swinging shut behind him. Marabel hurried to the window. Outside, Silas and his men were reining in their horses, dust curling around their boots as they dismounted. Takakota stood in the center of the street, his presence alone enough to slow their steps. Silas tied off his reins, his movements deliberate. "You've been busy," he said, his smile brittle. "Paying debts, making promises. I've got another debt you can pay. Yours, for breathing my town's air." Cole chuckled, tapping the butt of his rifle. Maybe $2 a spit was too cheap. Takakota didn't move. "You're welcome to try," he said, his voice carrying down the street. The air stilled, even the onlookers pretending to sweep doorways, pausing to watch. Silas stepped closer. "Every man's got a price, Apache." "Some men can't be bought," Takakota replied. "Then they can be broken," Silas shot back. Cole swung down from his horse, rifle in hand. "You cost us a good bit of coin yesterday. Men wanted their fun. Now they're sore, and I'm here to balance things." Takakota's eyes flicked once to Marabel's window before returning to Cole. "You spit on her once. That was your mistake. Spitting again will be mine." Cole smirked, stepping closer. "You think you can take me?" "No," Takakota said evenly. "I think I can stop you before your breath reaches her." A laugh rose from one of Silas's men, thin and uneasy. "Boys, clear him from the street," Silas ordered. Two of the mounted men dismounted, moving to flank Takakota. He shifted his stance, boots firm in the dust. "Last chance," he said. "Leave." Cole lifted the rifle, not aiming yet, but close enough to call it a threat. Takakota's hand shot out, twisting the barrel and sending Cole stumbling, the weapon clattering to the ground. Before Cole could recover, Takakota shoved him hard into the dirt. The crowd leaned forward, murmurs rippling. Silas's voice cracked slightly as he snapped, "Enough!" Takakota stepped back, palms open to show he'd drawn no weapon. Silas glared at him for a long beat before spitting into the dust near his boots. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he mounted his horse. "Not worth my time," he said, though everyone could hear the dent in his pride. The men followed him out, leaving a hollow quiet in their wake. Takakota turned once toward the shop window before walking back to his horse. Inside, Hester's voice was grim. "He's not done." Marabel's hand closed over the coin in her pocket. Neither is he. By mid-afternoon, the air in Split Ridge felt brittle, like the town was holding its breath. Outside Hester Vaughn's sewing shop, the boardwalk groaned now and then under passing boots, but the steps were always too quick, too cautious. People were keeping their distance. Inside, Marabel sat at a low work table, mending a hem with hands that couldn't quite stop trembling. Every creak of the floorboards outside drew her eyes toward the door. Hester's needle moved in quick, sharp jabs. "If they mean to come, it'll be before dark," she said without looking up. "Silas likes to make his points when there's still light for everyone to watch." "Then maybe we should close up now," Marabel murmured. "Close too early and you'll look scared," Hester replied. "He'll smell that a mile away." The bell over the door jangled suddenly. Cole Danner stepped inside, his hat low, the dust from his fall that morning still clinging to his shirt. Two other men followed, their shoulders broad enough to block most of the light from the doorway. The shop instantly smelled of sweat and stale tobacco. "Afternoon, ladies," Cole drawled, though the smile never reached his eyes. "Mayor sent me to collect the rest of that debt. Interest's gone up." Hester set her mending down and planted both hands on the counter. Debts paid. You can tell Silas to look elsewhere for his sport. Cole took a slow step toward Marabel. Oh, I think there's more to collect. See, you embarrassed me this morning, and that don't sit right. Marabel rose from her stool, the work table still between them. I didn't lay a hand on you. You didn't have to. Your friend did it for you. He leaned forward, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. Where is he now? Out of town already? A sharp knock rattled the back door. Cole's grin widened. Maybe that's him now, bringing me a proper apology. One of his men moved to unlatch the door, but the moment he did, it swung open hard, slamming into his shoulder. Takakota filled the frame, one hand shoving the man aside as he stepped in. His height seemed to shrink the room, his dark eyes fixed on Cole. Leave. Cole straightened but didn't move. Or what? You'll throw me down again in front of my friends? Yes, Takakota answered, and the certainty in his voice drained some of the swagger from Cole's posture. The man Takakota had shoved reached for the pistol at his belt, but Takakota caught his wrist and twisted sharply, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. Pick it up, he told Hester without looking away from Cole. She did, tucking it under the counter. This is between me and her, Cole spat. No, Takakota said, stepping closer. It's between you and the debt you think you're owed. I paid it. Now I'm collecting the change in peace. For a moment, the only sound in the shop was the faint hiss of the kettle on the stove. Then Cole backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving Takakota's face. You can't watch her every hour, he said. I don't need to, Takakota replied. Just the ones you're near. Cole spat on the floorboards and pushed past his men. The bell over the door jingled in their wake. Takakota turned to Marabel. It's time you left this shop. With you? She asked. If you'll trust me. She didn't hesitate long. Hester was already wrapping a shawl around her shoulders and pressing a small bundle of bread into her hands. Go with him, the seamstress urged. You'll be safer outside town than here. Takakota opened the back door, scanning the alley before stepping out first. Stay close. The roan mare waited in the shadow of the livery wall, saddled and ready. He lifted her up with one sure motion, then swung into the saddle behind her, his chest steady against her back. They rode out through the narrow gap between buildings, avoiding the main street where Silas's eyes would be waiting, the sound of the mare's hooves muffled by the sandy soil. The sun hung low enough now that the shadows of the cottonwoods reached far across the prairie. The wind carried the faint smell of sage and dust as Takakota guided the roan mare away from Split Ridge, her stride quick but not hurried, the pace of someone who knew the importance of not looking chased. Marabel held the bundle of bread tight against her lap, her fingers still tingling from the suddenness of their departure. The pounding of her own heartbeat made it hard to hear anything else. She twisted slightly to look over her shoulder. Do you think they'll follow? They'll follow, Takakota said without looking back. Men like Silas don't take a loss quietly. The land began to slope, the grass giving way to patches of rocky soil. Ahead, the faint shimmer of water caught the lowering light. The sound of it reached them next, the steady rush of a river cutting through the prairie. We'll cross here? She asked. Takakota slowed the mare as they neared the bank, the water swirling deep and cold in the center. Not yet. He dismounted, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. They'll expect us to cross. We'll make them believe we did. Marabel slid down with his help, her skirts brushing the water's edge. The chill of the river licked at her ankles, startling after the day's heat. Takakota led the mare into the shallows, the water swirling around her knees. We go downstream, he said. Careful steps, no splashing. They moved along the water's edge, the current tugging at their legs. The roan's ears twitched at every distant sound. Overhead, branches dipped low, casting long shadows that made the surface shimmer in broken light. Marabel concentrated on placing her feet exactly where Takakota stepped. The hem of her dress grew heavy, soaked through, but the cold helped steady her racing heart. After several minutes, Takakota angled the mare toward a bend where the bank flattened and the trees grew thick. We'll leave here. Tracks will fade into the grass before they can find them. They climbed out, the wet earth sucking briefly at their boots. Takakota paused, listening. The sound of hoofbeats reached them, faint but coming from upriver. Voices carried on the wind. They're close, she whispered. That's the point. he replied, his tone calm. They'll see the tracks going into the water where we first stepped in. They'll waste time searching the far bank. They moved quickly into the cover of the cottonwoods, where the trunks stood pale and close together. The air here was cooler, thick with the smell of leaves and damp soil. Marabel stumbled once on a hidden root, catching herself against his arm. Sorry, she murmured. Better to fall here than where they can see you, he said. They pressed deeper into the grove until the river's sound softened behind them. In a small clearing, Takakota stopped. We'll camp here tonight. The roan grazed quietly at the edge while Takakota unrolled a thin blanket for her and another for himself a few paces away. He crouched between two flat stones, striking a small fire that burned low and steady, more glow than flame. Marabel sat, drawing her damp skirts close around her. Do you think they'll give up? No, he said, feeding a twig into the embers. Men like Silas don't give up. They get tired. They make mistakes. That's when you end it. She studied him in the flickering light, the strong lines of his face, the braid over his shoulder, the quiet certainty in his voice. And after, she asked, after you've kept me safe? Takakota looked at her for a long moment. That depends on where you want to go when no one's chasing you. The fire crackled softly between them. Somewhere beyond the trees, a coyote called, its voice rising and falling in the night air. Marabel felt the weight of the silver coin in her pocket, the one he'd pressed into her palm as a promise. It was cool against her skin, but the thought behind it was warm enough to keep her from feeling the chill of the damp cottonwood night. Dawn broke clear and sharp, the air cool enough to carry the scent of river water and damp earth from the night before. A pale gold light spilled across the prairie, touching the cottonwood leaves with fire before filtering down to the small clearing where Takakota was already dousing the embers of their fire. Marabel folded the blanket he had given her, the weight of the silver coin still pressing against her hip through the pocket of her dress. She had barely slept, but it wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was the thought of what it would mean to face the town again. Takakota cinched the roan mare's girth strap, speaking without looking up. We ride back. She froze. Into town? Won't that just hand us to them? It ends today, he said simply. If you keep hiding, Silas wins. If you walk through that square with your head high, he loses. The words lodged in her chest like a challenge she hadn't expected but couldn't refuse. She nodded. The ride back was quiet, the prairie brushed gold by the early sun. As Split Ridge came into view, Takakota slowed the mare, steering her toward the wide main road. People noticed before they arrived. Faces appeared in windows, figures lingered in doorways. They entered the square at a steady pace. The same platform where she had stood bound now loomed ahead, the stains on the boards still visible in the morning light. Silas was already there, leaning against a post outside the saloon. Cole and two others flanked him, their expressions taut. Well, back so soon? Silas called, his smile thin. Takakota dismounted and offered Marabel his hand. She stepped down onto the same dust where her knees had trembled 2 days before, but this time her spine stayed straight. We've got no business, Silas said, unless you're here to pay a new toll. Takakota's voice carried clearly. The debt is paid. The whole town knows it. You try to touch her again, you'll answer to me. Cole's laugh was short, meant to rattle. You gonna fight all of us, big man? If I must, Takakota replied, but I think you've already fought enough for 1 week. Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Shopkeepers, ranch hands, and even a few of the women who had turned away before now stepped closer. The sound of measured footsteps came from the sewing shop. Hester Vaughn emerged, wiping her hands on her apron, and came to stand beside Marabel. She's walking the square, she said loudly, and anyone tries to stop her will have me to deal with too. The air thickened, balanced on the edge of a single word. Silas's eyes narrowed, reading the shift in the crowd. Finally, with a flick of his wrist, he turned toward the saloon. Let her walk. I've better things to do. Cole muttered something under his breath, but followed. Takakota looked at Marabel and inclined his head toward the open path. Her legs felt heavy, but she stepped forward, Hester on one side and Takakota on the other. Each step sounded louder than it should, the dust rising gently beneath her feet. No one moved to block them. The sunlight caught on the shop windows, on the silver coin in her pocket, on the faint stains still visible on the auction platform's boards. When they reached the far end of the square, Takakota stopped. "You kept your head high," he said quietly. "Now you can choose what comes next." Marabel drew the coin from her pocket, the weight of it warm from her hand. "You've earned it back," she said, offering it to him. He closed her fingers over it instead. "Keep it. Let it remind you you're worth more than what they tried to sell you for." Their eyes met, and for the first time in days, the knot in her chest loosened. Takakota mounted the roan, but didn't ride away immediately. "If you ever need me, I'll come," he said. Then he turned the mare toward the open road, his silhouette cutting clean against the morning light. Marabel stood there, the square behind her, the coin in her hand, and the taste of freedom fresh on her tongue. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Oldic Wild West stories. If you had been in that square, would you have stood beside her too, no matter the cost? Tell us in the comments.